Thank you, Andrew, and thanks everyone who's chosen to join us. Today we're going to be answering or attempting to answer the question, how can we attract more skills to the mining industry? How can we attract better talent? And what can we do to make mining a more appealing place to work? I think we're all aware that that's a very complex thing to answer, principally because mining it's international, it's in many jurisdictions, it has many different functions, and it also has many layers of seniority. So it's actually a collection of questions, and it requires a series of answers, but we're going to try our best to sum it up if we can. So breaking with tradition, we're just going to introduce ourselves and explain a little bit about what got us into mining, or why we chose it, and hopefully that will throw up some of the positives early on. So I'll kick off with me. As Andrew said, I founded Extractive Search. I got into mining originally, if I'm honest, because the margins were better than the other functions I was working in. But what kept me here is the people, the international nature of mining, and indeed the complexity of the technical challenges that it offers. It offers an intellectual challenge. Leanne?
Hi everyone. So I'm Leanne and I head up HR for Central Asia Metals. I've been with the company for 2.5 years now, but I've been in the mining industry as a whole for 7 years. I kind of fell into mining by accident. So before I worked my way up in HR in the manufacturing industry in the aerospace and defence sector. But after several years, I really had a kind of bug to live and work abroad. And so that is what I did. And I moved to Vancouver in Canada, and that's where I secured a role with Eldorado Gold. And so I worked for them for 4 years for their corporate HR function, and got to work with an amazing team and also travel to all the 5 operations as well. But of course, then the pandemic hit, and so I moved back home, and that's where I was put in touch with Mr. Nigel Robinson, who's Camel's CEO, and so I've been there ever since. So it's been a great time, great few years. I've travelled a lot as well, and spent a lot of time in North Macedonia and in Kazakhstan. And but I think in terms of the attraction to mining, like for me, it gives everybody the opportunity to travel, to really spend time in different countries, to make new friends and experiences, and learn new cultures, really. So, yeah.
I think likewise for me, I came into mining serendipitously. I'm an anthropologist, and I moved to London after doing my PhD fieldwork to start a fellowship. But there was a long gap in between when I would start that fellowship and me moving to London. So I ended up working in a startup mining company. There was a CEO, a board, lots of lawyers, and then me. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is an anthropologist doing here? I just came from a site with indigenous communities who were against the mining operations in that jurisdiction. Why am I here? So, called my PhD advisor. He said, yes, why are you there? And kudos to you, because there aren't a lot of you in mining, and that is the issue. So, stay there, be impactful, be effective, and see if you can change from within. So that's how I ended up in the space of mining. But I work in international development. That was always my goal. And there's a very strong correlation between sustainable development and the extractive industries. Not from the disruption of the industry, but the potential that the industry provides to those local communities. So the impact and the ability to incite change in industries like the mining sector is why I'm still engaging with mining.
Very good.
Great.
Caroline?
Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm Caroline Donnelly. I manage a private equity fund that provides financing to mining companies in the form of streams and royalties. I come from the accounting background. I'm a chartered accountant by training. And my first job, once I'd finished my articles, was at a bank doing the accounting for the mining finance team. I suppose you could say I had some sort of background in mining because my father was a metallurgist or a metallurgist, depending on where you're from. And so I had some vague idea that he had something to do with digging stuff out the ground. I didn't really know what. But moving into the finance aspects and doing the mining project finance certainly opened my eyes to what the mining business entails. So I did project finance for a number of years, then I moved into private equity, now I co-manage this fund. And for me, what's so fascinating about this business is how every day is different. It doesn't really matter where you are in the mining sector spectrum, but every day has something new. And every day will bring up new challenges, but every day will also bring up new wins. And that, for me, is really the fascinating piece of our business, of just how varied it is.
Okay,
Don.
over to me.
Thanks, Caroline.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Don Duvel. I'm the CEO of the Norcat Group of Companies. We're headquartered in Sudbury, Ontario, with offices in the US and Latin America. From a mandate perspective, we really aspire to do two things. One, we aspire to be the global leader in skilled labor training and development for the mining industry. We train between 25 to 30,000 people per year in the mining function, be it within the Americas or around the world, building content curriculum and then delivering programs as needed. But akin to the question of how I ended up in the space, we are also quite unique in that we own and operate a nickel mine in Sudbury, but the primary purpose of this asset is to enable tech companies to develop and test and or demonstrate and showcase emerging tech that these companies believe are poised to transform the global mining industry. And in that, about 70% of these companies, be they venture-backed or large multi-billion-dollar enterprises, about 70% of them, we are their first reference customer that they can build a narrative around to subsequently get larger sales. How I came into this role about 10 years ago, I have a huge passion and background in venture capital in tough tech. So I spent a lot of time working with tangible IP startups, venture-backed companies, junior private equity invested companies, helping them grow and scale. And I thought, what a great opportunity to really get into an industry that I think is poised to be transformed with the continued adoption of emerging tech from a vibrant sell side, an emerging tech ecosystem. So a lot of my day is spent looking at prospective deals, enabling them to do development testing work, and seeing all the talent that surrounds those emerging companies grow and flourish. So that's my background.
Thanks very much, Don. I don't mean to pick on you, but we'll start with you.
Oh dear.
Coming back to the question, how can we attract more skills? How can we attract more talent? I think it's good to identify the issues that we're facing. What challenges are you facing on the ground in Canada, and what are you doing to overcome them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So from a contextual perspective in Canada, there's a fair bit of market research, and the estimates right now indicate that just in Canada alone, over the next 10 years, we will need between 80 to 100,000 new mine workers. Partially due to expansion, but for the most part, the aging population, retirees, combined with the expansion, is creating a meaningful gap, and it's happening right now. There is a pretty significant battle for talent. So one, we have a population issue. Second largest country in the world with 35 million people, so there is just a root cause macroeconomic challenge. Our federal government is working extremely hard to open up the floodgates, if you will, and encourage immigration. Close to 500,000 to 750,000 people a year is the anticipated plan. We need workers. A lot of big mining companies are recruiting internationally. But the other part, too, that we're seeing is with this transformation of technology adoption in large mining companies, you're seeing the supply service tech ecosystem becoming more important. Mining companies are becoming, buyers of technology, buyers of talent from a tech perspective, whereas historically they had in-house R&D and built proprietary competitive IP. Now that's changed. It's an outsourced innovation model. So what you're starting to see is talent requirements in the supply service tech companies that are selling to those companies. So a huge need for individuals who understand data analytics, onboard telemetry, electrification, all the supply side equation. So in Canada, there's also a fairly interesting challenge on kind of the elevated levels of skill sets in the supply service tech ecosystem, so those companies can grow and flourish and subsequently sell those products to be deployed. So it's both on the mining company side, but also the supply service. There's a bit of a talent crunch, very different skill sets required in both.
No, that's a really comprehensive answer, thank you. And I hadn't realised that the forecast was that large in as far as the talent that's going to be required in the future. That's quite incredible. Perhaps thinking more globally now, and going to come to Stacey. You have many touch points, I'm sure, globally through your many networks, but also through your client base. What are you seeing are the main issues or barriers for us at the moment regarding talent attraction and skills?
Sorry.
Okay.
I
Want a
think I
water?
will have to come back and answer this so I can go and cough off stage.
Okay. Do you want a water?
One moment. I think I just need to cough.
Okay. All
A
right.
lot of speaking this week. Apologies.
Okay.
I'll be back.
No problems.
This is the first time speakers had to do this, right?
That's okay. Well, perhaps, Caroline, I know we've talked before about this. It's fair to say that mining has a historical PR issue when it comes to attracting talent. I know for my own part, when I come to onboard people into my business, I tend to spend the first 10 minutes, if they're not from mining, explaining the importance and function of mining, its value, the fact that it's sustainable and necessary for the green transition. Joe Public doesn't seem to know that. So I'm curious, to what extent have you come up against this PR issue? And not to put too much on your shoulders with this question, but how do we deal with that?
Right. So, some kind of interesting anecdotes, because when you're in the sector, right, you think everybody else understands mining. You think we all know that we dig stuff out the ground and it becomes something that gets used, as long as it's not gold, but it becomes something that gets used over time. And I've had a couple of instances, one where I told someone I was in mining and he turned to me and he went, "Wonderful, crypto." No, not that kind of mining. And then I had another incident not too long ago where I was chatting to a woman in my neighborhood and she said to me, "What do you do?" I said, we provide financing to mining companies. And she said to me, "Oh, is that still a thing? I thought that mining no longer really existed and we didn't need that." And this was a woman who works for the US government. That's what her job is. She lives in a nice-ish neighborhood. She has a couple of young kids. And her view on mining is that we don't need it anymore. And I think that's a massive problem that we have with the sector. Relative to oil and gas, this is such a tiny sector. I know we all think it's quite a big sector because everybody knows everybody else to, 1 or 2 degrees of separation. But it's actually a pretty small sector when you look at the amount of people involved. And unless we start telling people about the sector, what it is we do, and where the goods and services that we use, like where all the stuff comes from, we're never going to attract people into the sector. Because I think there's a vast group of people out there that just don't even know it exists.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that comes down to the geographic differences, because each country has its own issues. I know mining in the UK is now really not seen as an industry that's thriving, and it's certainly not one where talent is necessarily it's their first thought or attracted to go into. Canada, I imagine, somewhat different because it's a huge part of the economy. So it really depends on where you are as to what that message is, I think. But Stacey, how are you feeling now?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, good. So coming back to that question for you then, as far as the issues as you see them, because you have such a wide remit with your network, what issues do you believe we're facing when it comes to talent attraction, new skills, and also making mining more appealing to the new generation?
I think Caroline touched on a crucial aspect of mining not actually being understood more globally and more broadly. We are in this very tiny microcosm of an industry, which is mining. It is not like oil and gas. And the PR around mining hasn't always been as open or as heavily invested in as other industries. And I think that's where the gap between what we actually do and what others are seeing, that's how it comes into play. I work across Latin America and the Caribbean and Sub-Saharan Africa, where they are major mining jurisdictions. So there is a narrative in country where, in the countries that I work, where mining is the major hiring institutions, right? in other jurisdictions, that's not what we're seeing. And I think what we need to be looking at is, one, how are we defining the industry for others, and not just within the context of geology, technical degrees, and from environmental scientists who are looking at these operations around mine sites, but how are we bringing more people from tech, more of the innovators, more of the quantum physicists into the discussions to really talk about how the industry is beyond what it has been about in the past.
Yeah.
Just to make reference to the panel prior, where they were also looking at the future of talent, one of the questions posed was, well, how are we connecting a love of building building with Legos to mining? We're not really doing that, and we need to engage, and we need to look at our partnerships that can help facilitate that.
Yeah, and I think because globally every government is different, and each government is elected for a period of time, they're in a sense very often driven by what Joe Public already thinks. They might not want to take a stand to back a certain industry. So it could well be that it's down to industry to somehow unite globally and push that message. But Leanne, if we could come to you.
Sure.
Thinking about your business and Macedonia, Kazakhstan, when you're attracting talent in country, how are you doing that? How are you retaining them? And how are you making it appealing?
Good question, thank you. I think first and foremost, when I first joined CAML, it was really establishing the HR teams in both of the jurisdictions that we operate in. And then from there, we looked at our employee benefits and what we could do in those areas. So, for example, that we've improved pensions and kind of employee welfare kind of type benefits, medicals. But we also pay our people very well. So we pay out, particularly in Macedonia, we pay our people 89%, I think, above the North Macedonian average wage. So we do a lot. We also offer lots of training and development opportunities. We've built management and leadership programs as well. But we are conscious that, okay, we do have an aging workforce, so how do we attract the next generation? And so what we've recently done is team up with the local schools and education, and we've developed profiles in mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, so that we have that skill sets in the future as well. So from helping kids from the outset, from the ages of 14, we help them come into the mine, gain that practical experience. And then after they leave school, we also support them in terms of scholarships for universities. And then hopefully once they graduate university, we're able to attract them into the mine as well. So it's about developing that pipeline of talent really for the future, which is great. And then also we provide opportunities for our people to work across the site. So we've moved people from Kazakhstan to Macedonia. But in terms of our hiring practices, we want to make sure that we give the opportunities to our own employees first and foremost and help them develop in their careers. But where we don't have the skill sets, then we'll aim to hire locally first and look in our local communities. And where we still don't find the skill sets, then we'll search more nationally. And then if we can't find anyone more nationally, that's probably when I pick up the phone to someone like yourself, James, to help with the international search. So, yeah.
Okay, no, thanks very much. What I really like about what you said is that you will progress national talent and give them the opportunity to become an expat within the group.
Yeah.
One of our practices that deals with mine site management has noticed a trend over the last sort of 15 years where a lot more nationals have been given that opportunity, and then they've joined the expat merry-go-round, and they themselves have really vastly improved their lives. So I think that's fantastic. Within your business, Leanne, to come to you again, what do you notice are the differences, perhaps, say, between corporate recruitment, maybe in London, where you're based, and the mine site? What are the differences or the differences in the challenges that you face?
Yeah, good question. I think in general the difference between kind of corporate and site, I mean, from a corporate perspective, we're the ones that are setting the strategy and the vision. But then obviously at a site, they're the ones that help us. And I think from a corporate perspective, we have 18 people in London. But we all spend a lot of time in our operations and really build those relationships at site and work really closely with them so that we can really achieve our strategy and also get their buy-in to our KPIs and get their input into when it comes that time when we set the strategy as well. So I think that's probably one of the things. But also, ever since the pandemic, there's been a lot of requests in terms of working from home, and I think it's a lot easier from a corporate perspective. Like I said, a lot of people travel anyway, and people do have that flexibility. But when it comes to the operations, we always had everyone had to be working in the operations, no matter kind of what discipline you worked in. Because we got an underground mine in Macedonia. But of course, over time, we realised that actually we're probably not attracting the right talent because we're actually losing people because people do want that flexibility now, no matter kind of what country you work in, because people have seen that it works. So we're being more flexible in terms of letting people have the opportunity to work from home when they can. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's crucial. We need, and particularly in the corporate world as well, to compete with other industries that have, when we step into functions where, if you take a white collar function where we could be taking someone from any sector, and we get a view into the benefits packages in other places. Mm-hmm. The lifestyle benefits are truly incredible, and mining to a degree does need to, but is seemingly starting to catch up on that. So I think that's an excellent point. Something we need to keep all certainly building on. Don, coming back to you, if we were to make the assumption, which certainly I do, that we can't rely on governments to educate the next generation of people about the benefit of mining, what do you think maybe companies can do to get over that hurdle?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it was a theme that, combining your comment about government and, Stacey's comment around awareness. A really interesting anecdote that I think puts things into perspective. I think it was 2017, the University of Toronto, one of, if not the largest university in North America, with a vibrant mining engineering and geological sciences department and faculty, had a mining career fair day. Where students can engage with the mining companies and learn about what mining is, et cetera. Probably a room, probably twice the size of this facility here. What was interesting, I went to it, not a single mining company had a booth for the mining career day.
Right.
So what begs the question is, well, what's missing in this equation? And I think there's a bit of complacency historically that they didn't need to do that, and though I think the world is changing. So I agree, there is a role for government, there's a role of academic institutions, be it at the elementary, high school, or academic institution level, to advocate and promote that there are meaningful and good paying careers in the mining industry across all facets of the supply chain. But I think there's a sense of immediacy that these mining companies themselves need to convey what the opportunities are, and they have a really good story now. If you're doing extraction on critical minerals contributing to the battery electric vehicle supply chain, what a great narrative around climate change and global warming. You can advocate for that, and that matters. That motivates the younger generation. Or you're creating a job whereby I, as a 19-year-old, can get a job using teleremote autonomous systems, sitting in the confines of an urban center in downtown London, operating a piece of mobile equipment at a mine site that's 500 kilometers away. That is a very appealing job because I'm going to have an iPad-type interface using a game controller that's embedded in my DNA, and arguably you can pay them less and they'll enjoy it. Money is not the motivator for this generation.
Yeah, I agree.
They want to have unique, interesting. Mining companies need to promote that. They need to advocate that we're using teleremote autonomous vehicle systems, we're using telemetry systems, and if you're doing extraction of a critical mineral contributing to the battery electric vehicle supply chain, what a great story. So associations, I think, are doing a wonderful job. I think some academic institutions are doing a good job. But I would call the question some of the mining companies, they have a great platform. They have the capability of doing it. They just need to do a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
So with that in mind, so I grew up in South Africa, as you can probably hear. And for a long period of time in South Africa, which admittedly had its own dynamics, the large mining companies would provide bursaries to students to go and study mining engineering. And it paid for the full university, which in those days admittedly was a bit cheaper, but it paid for the 4-year degree and gave people some money to live, paid for residence or whatever was required. On the back of that person then working for the mining company to, in inverted commas, work it back. But essentially what the mining companies were doing was creating that future generation coming through the universities.
Yeah.
And I have lots of friends who became mining engineers because their parents couldn't afford to send them to university, and they could get a full bursary to go from Anglo or one of those mining companies.
Yeah.
So that side of the business, I think, has fallen away.
100%.
That ability for people to actually know that if they went into something and they got their degree, they would come out with a job on the other side. That unfortunately has fallen away, and that was where I feel like a lot of the mining engineers, frankly, came from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and we only see the downside of that many years later, and so we almost need a time machine now to go back and fix some of those wrongs. And I think it's very important that we recognize that not only have some of those programs fallen away, but in some instances, mainly due to perception, the problem is getting worse. We had a UK university recently who banned mining companies from a career fair under some misguided notion that it was bad for the environment, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. Because obviously the so-called intelligentsia didn't understand that mining is actually going to pave the way for the renewable transition. So, sorry, I get riled up when I think about that one. It is really,
But it's the story that needs to be told.
Yeah, it's truly irritating. But which I think, Caroline, bringing it back to a more positive note, you've seen so many portfolio companies over the years, and you've probably appraised many through the royalties work that you do. Which companies, well, don't have to name any names, but of the companies that you've seen who got these strategies right, what were the hallmarks of those strategies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we see a lot of is we see a lot of sort of the family mining structure. Mm-hmm. So like in my case, where my father was in mining and I just kind of fell into it, but I had some idea. We see quite a lot of those. And I think that's because parents talk to their kids about what they do, and so the children know it exists, and so, it becomes something which is on their radar screen.
Yeah.
So that we've seen work. We've seen in some of the other private equity funds that they will hire, they'll hire people straight out of university, and then they'll take the geologists or the mining engineers and train them in finance. I don't know, I guess that's sort of hit and miss as to whether that works well or not. I think what we see and what I saw in my previous role when looking for associates and analysts to join us was that there were no women going into the sector. There were no women joining the investment banks going into mining. And you would think in Canada, it being such a major part of the ecosystem and the economy, that you would see more women coming out of finance degrees and the like, going into investment banks on the mining side. But there was just almost no interest. And I think that to me is an important piece of it is, being more on the finance side myself, is how do we get different people involved in the finance and make that portion interesting to them? And I think sort of some of what everybody's kind of touched on is what we forget about this business is how highly transferable the skills are.
Yeah.
If you go off and become a doctor, as an example, you can then practice as a doctor in the country where you trained and very few other places. If you're a Canadian doctor and you want to go to Australia, you've got to retrain. You're an Australian doctor who wants to go to South Africa, you've got to retake all your exams. The same for lawyers. Whereas if you're in the mining sector, you might need some country-specific skills, but so many of the skills in mining are transferable from country to country, which to me that's a fascinating part of our business that we don't talk about enough, is that ability to be able to move from one country to the next.
Yep.
and take those same skills with you without having to rewrite all your exams.
And can I just add, and one sector to the next, right? Because we think that, oh, well, I've been studying in this degree for so long that now I can't enter mining. However, it's so transferable that it, regardless of the sector in which maybe you started off in, it's still a welcoming. I mean, I'm an anthropologist. If you have the anthropologist telling you this, it must be true. Right? So.
Yeah, no, there are, yeah, and this is where it comes back to just not thinking about mining in a binary way of just being technical. It is a myriad of functions, and certainly in the corporate space, you know, if you were to take something like, you know, a finance search, there's an opportunity to bring, you know, CFOs from other industries into mining, and that could, you know, bolster, you know, for instance, the female representation that currently doesn't look that great, frankly. So yeah, okay. Well, Stacey, coming back to you, on a more positive note, what do you think we're getting right at the moment? What is the mining industry doing well that perhaps we can build on in the future?
Well, I think for one, the mining sector is embracing its role as part of a sustainable world, right? I think before we really defined mining as it says on the tin, an extractive industry, but now we are looking at how we put back in and how we actually make an impact on climate. And that's quite positive for me. And seeing the number of ESG panels or ESG related panels at every mining conference that I've participated in for the year alone, it says that the industry is interested. Not everyone is there yet, and not everyone should be there yet, because we're a different learning curve, different parts of the curve, right, of the learning curve. But the fact that ESG is part of the discourse now, I think that is positive.
Yeah.
And if we break it down, really engaging on what the E, the S, the G means. Are we talking about gender transformative approaches to hiring practices? I'd love to see more female GMs. We're not actually talking about general managers and more women on the sites running the mines, but we should be. But we'll get there, and we're slowly getting there. And C-suite, you know, we're not talking enough about bringing more women at C-suite. Instead, we have been focusing at strategy level, which is great, on boards, and we're seeing the impact of that, with more women coming on boards, but we still need to have more, and we still need to have more women in C-suite. But I had a great conversation earlier this morning, which is very relevant, which is on the governance side. And I love that she said if once we get governance right, then the E and the S follows, because obviously it's the strategy that sees the overall arching pitfalls that we're about to face, and they can embrace and they can at least lead and guide on the E and the S. But those conversations are happening, and I think as an industry, by virtue of us having these conversations, it's already you know, it's one step closer. We still have a good way to go, but once we're open, I don't want to be too philosophical, but maybe we do need to have a little bit of a me saying these things. But once we are open to what are the intersectional conversations that we should be having and what should we be doing about it, then I think we're good to go. You know, we have a very diverse panel here as well. And by virtue of having that diverse panel, it's different from what we were used to, right? We're not all mining engineers, I don't think any of us are mining engineers.
No.
Historian.
So, so kudos. And I think this is perhaps an indication that we are going in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We've seen a lot of positive changes, and I think, like Caroline said, it begins with self-awareness. And there's been certainly, I mean, only got into mining around 2003, 2004, but just in that time, there's been a massive change in self-awareness in so many ways, and particularly, it feels like in the last 3 years, especially on the ESG side, but as far as an understanding about that gap between the headcount that we need and the headcount that we have, and what can we do to be more attractive. I do feel the questions are being asked. I mean, we're having this conversation now, so that's great. I take to your point, we don't want to be in echo chambers, though. We need to get that message out there. So I think we're doing it. We need to get that message out there more, but there's also that time lag. So let's say we had it perfect now, and we were bringing in loads of talent into mining today. It doesn't pay off at the senior level until many years later. So there is going to be that sort of gulf, unfortunately. I just wonder, does anybody in the audience have any questions at all? Yes, that gentleman there.
And whilst the microphone is going there, I just wanted to say that there is need for more innovation in how in our hiring practices and how we think about the skills as opposed to the history or the background or the credentials of those, of the roles in which we're hoping to fill.
Yeah,
Right.
no, good point.
Mark Berry, thank you for the excellent presentations. I must admit that I'm incredibly disappointed to see how few people are attending such an important topic, but thank you for your time. I could spend the next hour discussing this topic with you, but I want to make a couple of important points that are really important to me. I think that the 90% or more of my colleagues in the mining industry acknowledge that mining has a bad name. And we all tend to accept that without really understanding why. And I think it's informative to understand why, because that's part of the solution. And we've lived through 40 years, particularly in developed countries, of mining being progressively denigrated through the education system and the general media. And there's a good reason why our young people don't like mining, is because they've effectively been brainwashed through the system. And as an example of that, 30 years ago, my 8-year-old daughter came home from primary school saying, "Why do you work in such a bad place?"
Right.
And it's because of the messages that come through the education system. Not necessarily deliberately, but that's the messages that our young people have got for the last 40 years. What has the mining industry done to abate that? Absolutely nothing at a global strategic level.
Yeah.
There is lots of fantastic work that's done at an organisational level, at an industry association level, an individual company level.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely a vacuum at a global strategic level. We are a global industry. The top 20 multinational companies should hang their heads in shame at the lack of activity and promotion and communication. A lot of the things that you've made comments on today, totally agree. They would be significantly addressed if we had a strategic global communication plan throughout the world that addressed the differences in what's required to communicate to a Canadian, Australian, US market versus what's required in Asia versus what's required in Africa. We just don't have that.
No, I think that's a very good point, well made, and it sort of does bring us back to really what is the common problem, and what could be or should be a possible solution. If there was just a way of globally combining perhaps the wealth, the time and the expertise, and it might be to put a lot of the, as you said, the weight of that on some of the majors, the top 20 companies, and that's not really a burden that they shouldn't feel, that they should feel aggrieved at, because it's going to benefit them in the long run. But there is a huge time lag. So I think if we're going to do that, we better do it quick. Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments?
There's organizations like the World Gold Council where, groups like that could be putting out information into the media about mining and where it's going and what it's doing.
I love their commercials.
The only challenge,
They're
of course,
fabulous.
is with gold is that we
Yeah.
dig it out the ground and then we stick it back in a safe somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not particularly helpful from that perspective. But there are organizations out there like that could do that sort of thing.
Well, case in point to your comment, if you think a lot of the motivation of new entrants into a sector, what do they care about? And if you argue one of them is the ability to work in an innovative business, you look at the Googles, the Amazons, and some of the attraction to that is just the nuances of this is a cool, interesting tech company. Interestingly enough, there was a presentation yesterday, and it was just surprising, that they did a global ranking. I think it was either done by Forbes or BCG. I can't recall what the paraphrasing was. But Vale was ranked 19th in the world. I don't think anyone within Vale even knows that. But what a platform to advocate that this is a really innovative, interesting, arguably perceived as a bit of a tech company in this ranking. But they were ranked, I think, number 19th based on the presentation yesterday. You could build a narrative around that. That can motivate and inspire. And again, if you look at their adoption rate of emerging technologies, not only to drive competitiveness and shareholder value, a company of that size is deploying these technologies also to create jobs to win the battle for talent. And it's slowly changing. So I have a sense of optimism with the technology transformation that the global industry is going through, because there will be different jobs and the narrative will have to change. But I think we need to do it faster. And I think the mining companies need to advocate for that story. 19th in the world, Vale. I don't even think people within Vale know that. And that's an important narrative.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there's a big component of this that's comms, and I agree, because I think earlier I said PR, but there is a lot to do with trust building. So people are rightfully angry with mining companies historically, but one, we're not talking about what are we doing to rectify our historical discrepancies. I'm being very kind by saying that. So where's the trust building? And I think by staying in our silos, we haven't done ourselves any favors by taking away from the fact that a lot of young people do not trust mining companies. They don't trust the extractive industries because of the history of mistrust that they've experienced and their parents have, or their communities have experienced. So yes, comms, but within the comms, how are we building back trust?
Yeah, indeed. And as I go through all of the things we're talking about, I keep coming back to this notion, like this gentleman pointed out, that there needs to be a centralized, global, singular vision, because each country is different. I interviewed a competitor recently in Australia, and I was very pleased to learn, this is a positive, that the majors there are going into schools, and they are doing this. Right. And they are getting people involved. So I think that's absolutely fantastic, but it's just not, I don't feel that in the UK. It can be further from the truth in the UK. So it just needs to be consistent, and it needs to benefit everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot of learning to do. In countries like South Africa, I'm from Guyana, there's the old national service where you went and you studied specific degrees, whether it's mining, physics, whatever that country thought as relevant to developing their economy. So we come from countries where this was embedded in the education paradigm. Maybe that's not the same for the UK, but you can learn from the global south, right? It's not always about the global south learning from the global north. I think there's a lot of learning from countries like South Africa, like Chile, like Brazil, where embedding mining, for example, within the education system can have a significant impact, especially when it comes to the fact that we do not have enough young people going into mining-related courses.
Yeah.
And I think I might have said this before, but I think we also need to tell people where all the stuff comes from. So again, I like anecdotes, as you've probably realized. So I had a guy pick me up from the airport not too long ago in his brand new Tesla. I was like, oh, this is cool. And it was matte black. I'm like, what is this? Oh, it's the new Tesla crossover SUV. And I said, oh, that's very nice. Why did you buy it? He said, well, I wanted to do my bit for energy transition. And now I live in Houston, right? So I live in the center of oil and gas for the US. I said, energy transition, and I like the idea of the electric vehicle. And I said, oh, that's cool. Like, you do know that 40% of our fuel mix is coal. Oh no, I didn't know that. Said, and you know that you need an awful lot of rare earths for the permanent magnets, you need all those other bits and pieces for the batteries, and this is where it comes from. I could tell you by the time I got out the car, that guy was so pleased I only lived 40 minutes away from the airport and not an hour and 40 minutes. Because there he was thinking, he was doing his bit for the planet by buying a Tesla. Meanwhile, he had no idea where any of the stuff came from.
Yeah.
And I think the unfortunate thing is people don't have that connection.
No.
And if you don't know where the stuff comes from that you want to use, how do you then send that message to people that, well, if you want these things and you want to be able to drive these cool cars or have these, great smartphones or be in this interesting form of tech, frankly, we need you to come into the sector at some point. So, there's a whole messaging around that as well, which, of course, this poor guy with his Tesla, who really was pleased when I got out the car, you could see this was something that it was so foreign to him, so completely and utterly foreign.
Yeah.
And I think to take that one step further, I mean, we have to think like the next generation, the younger generation, and what kind of forums they look at. So something we've been considering is about actually moving to things like TikTok and some of those kind of social media outlets to really create some cool and creative social media campaigns to really attract the next generation. So,
Yeah, no, it's a great shout. Perhaps just dissecting an iPhone and just explaining all the methods in it.
Why not?
That's a good way to relate to them, certainly. Do we have any more questions at all?
Take one last question.
Sorry, Andrew, I know we're overrunning.
Thanks for the great conversation. Puya Mosani, I'm the General Manager with Suncor Energy. Just before I give you the question, for the context, we're looking for a large number of technical folks in the mining industry, including about 70, 80 mining engineers that are vacancies within our organization.
I'm just going to make a note of that.
Yeah, as you should.
That's my job. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, no, but the point that I wanted to raise is all the efforts that this year we put into our talent management and development and actually recruiting. We are getting to a point that we need to change our strategy when it comes to talent acquisition, especially mining.
Yeah.
There's still need to be a lot of focus on the mining programs, geological programs within the universities. But when I was working with the head of mining program at UBC, University of British Columbia, and the head of the program at the same program at Colorado School of Mine, the question that they gave back to me was, why do you need them to be mining engineers or geological engineers? And they said, we are now getting set up that you could hire any type of engineers or even non-engineers and train them for what you need to train within mining. This is a bit of a step change in terms of how you go about your talent. It removes some of the roadblocks for getting the talent into the organization. But then after that, it's a lot easier to return them, especially based on the value we bring to the work. So I wanted to hear the panel's thoughts on that approach and the strategy.
Yeah, no, certainly I think it's a great approach. I can think of one example of one of our clients who opened up an asset in Panama, and there really hadn't been much of a mining history there at all. In fact, the closest industry really been dam building, so they did the same. They took people with related translatable skills and they reskilled them, and it was a tremendous success. So I think it's a great point, and it's certainly possible and definitely something that's working. Yeah, anyone else?
No, your comment's exactly what we're seeing in the Canadian context as well. Like if you look at the historical enrollment in mining engineering, geological sciences among colleges and universities in Canada, the enrollment's almost halved over the last 15 years. People just aren't, they're closing programs down, but there's still a demand for talent. So the institutions and the mining companies rather are going to these institutions, taking mechanical, civil, and then embedding them in an internal training program to give them the credentials to do the jobs. It's almost a defensive strategy in some respects. They're limited in options. So we're seeing that trend as well in Canada.
Yes, well, the proactive strategy from Women in Mining UK is to get more young people back into those courses. But that will take some time, and it takes the support of companies, organizations like yourselves, and other mining companies to help drive that. So yes, how are we partnering with associations and institutions that have the ear of the young people, whether it's young women or young people in general, to get them more interested? And one of the things that we're doing now is looking at much younger people so that we can start building that pipeline again. And so that when we do start those programs that the mining engineers in South Africa used to do, when we finally start them in the UK, because I think we will have to revert to that type of structure at some point, then we have a talent pool that's ready.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Andrew?
Well, thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause once again for a fantastic closing panel?